Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first Spring Boot meetup. I appreciate you guys coming in on a Saturday and giving us your valuable time. I'm your host. I am Sana. I'm a community executive here at GeekyAnts. Hello. Hi. Yeah, works. I'm your host. I'm Sana. I'm the community executive here at GeekyAnts. I handle internal and external communities. So if you have a project that you want to showcase or there's a talk that you want to give, you can reach out to me. Let me quickly tell you who we are. We are a product design and development studio that turns ideas into realities. We are a community driven company and focus on tech stacks like React, React Native, and Flutter. We have built some of the very great open source products like Native Base. If you have heard about it, it's a UI component library. And we have recently launched one of our other open source project called GlueStack. It's a universal UI library that helps you build design systems. We have also done endless open source contributions. We are core contributors of React and React Native. We attend a lot of conferences, both international and national and international. We will be attending React Advanced London in UK in October, and yeah, and we build relationships along. We build uh, great tech communities. So let's move on to the agenda. We have an amazing line of speakers today. They are from Walmart and Skillovilla, and obviously from Geeky Ants. I'll let the keynote speaker take over on the details for all of it. Let's move on to the most important thing. Please connect to the Wi-Fi Geeky Ants guest. The password is guest capital G at 1234. If you happen to skip this slide, please you can reach out to us. Let's set few ground rules for the event. Do not use any kind of hate speech and inappropriate comments. Keep it light and breezy. Be respectful and refrain from using strong words. There's a space for growth and learning, so please promote that. Get to know your fellow attendees and speakers, and definitely network. Keep your questions for the panel discussion and maintain silence while a speaker is giving their talk. And let's get started. So please follow our social media handles on LinkedIn and Twitter. To tell you more about why we are where we are going ahead with Spring Boot community, I would like to call upon our keynote speaker, Vasuki Vardhan. He's tech lead here at GeekyAnts, and he'll give you an insight of where we are heading towards the Spring Boot community.
Hello, good afternoon. And it's nice to see a lot of people coming in on a Saturday. Right? Uh, to start off with, I am Vasuki Vardhan. Right? I work as a tech lead over here at GeekyAnts. I do mostly backend. I also work on the infrastructure side, DevOps, and also a bit on the front end. So mostly a full stack uh, developer over here, right? So, yeah, coming to the entire point of this meetup, one, right? Why Spring Boot and why it is caught up on the hype very long back, and it is very relatable even to date, right? So, I mean, the very first point to start off with, it is very quick and easy to get started, right? So you have the Spring initializer and a lot of these things. Like most of your boilerplate code is hand provided to you, right? You don't need to go ahead and configure a lot of things. A lot of things are ready to work straight from the get go, right? And the next thing is it is production ready. That is what a lot of the enterprises are more interested on, right? So any product that they would want to use to build their products need to be production ready. It with components like Apache Tomcat being their embedded server and a lot of other things, right? This is completely production ready, right? And this has been tried and tested from a very long time, right? So even from the days of Spring MVC, right? So you would see the use of Apache Tomcat, right? So in Spring MVC, you would basically build a war or a jar and go ahead and deploy it onto Apache Tomcat server or even JBoss or all those Java servlets, right? So, but with Spring Boot, you already have it inbuilt, right? With Apache Tomcat. So those are a few key things which makes it production ready, and it is also very scalable, right? So multi-threading is built into the baseline of the entire framework, right? And the load handling capacity is very high, and also in terms of just code scalability, and in terms of traffic scalability, it is pretty much almost sorted, right? So you can basically use your solid principles, expand your code, and with multi-threading and all the things that Spring Boot already provides with Apache Tomcat, it is also very scalable on the network load, right? And it is very extensible, right? So you almost have around, like, at the very least you have around 100 to 150 starter modules that is available right in the Spring initializer, right? So I mean, it is very extensible. You can basically go ahead and tune Spring Boot into how you want it, right? Rather than it telling you what you can do and what you can't do. With the extensibility that it provides through plugins, you can basically go ahead and do all things necessary, right? And also, I mean, the entire community is very active, right? And we see a lot of people right over here, right? Spring Boot also has a very active community. I mean, from my earlier days of programming till date, I haven't really felt any particular issue with the community. I mean, anytime goes via Stack Overflow or anywhere, right? People are already available. Even though if it's a very small beginner issue to very complicated enterprise issues, you will find help on the community, right? It's really nice to have that. So coming to the core principles of Spring Boot, right? The first and main foremost thing is auto configuration, and this is probably there from the days of Spring MVC with XML configurations, but currently with annotations, it has become more easier, right? Like you just go ahead and define a few parameters in your properties file, and your database gets configured. Right? You define a few parameters for your server, your port numbers, SSL, everything is configured for you. Right? You really don't need to go ahead and do all those things at the code level. Right? You don't need to write your DSL code, and it is very opinionated. Right? So it comes with a bit of defaults, like its default in-memory database is H2, right? And it also uses Apache Tomcat as its embedded server, but that doesn't really limit you, right? it gives you an option, right? You can go ahead and change all those things. Like you don't want to use Tomcat, you want to use ZT. Right? You can still go ahead and do that. You can change your embedded server. You don't want to use H2, you want to use something like Postgres, MySQL, or even MongoDB for that matter, right? It also allows you to do that. It is completely opinionated. You can go ahead and configure it however you want it. And also, the best part is it is not all about configurations, right? Spring Boot has its own conventions to do it, right? So giving you a lot of opinionated defaults. I mean, if even if you miss a lot of configurations, a few configurations for that matter, your application is still well configured, right? You don't really need to worry about, okay, my configuration is messed up from the get-go, right? You don't need to go ahead and configure a server or any of those kind of things, right? So you have a set of defaults, right? For example, in Node.js or any particular case scenario, you would have to go ahead and provide the port number, for example, right? A very basic thing. With Spring Boot, you even if you skip that, it is fine. Right? You know for a fact that by default it will run on port 8080. Right? So those are a few things where it is more convention driven over configuration. So again, it will give you a lot of space to work on your own rather than being preconceived onto the configuration bits, right? And also, as we discussed before, it eliminates a lot of boilerplate code, right? You don't need to go ahead and write all the things to connect to a database and all those things. You give a particular configuration, you have it already over there, right? With data JPA, you also have a way to connect and query your DB, right? You don't need to go ahead and write those implementations anywhere, right? It is already provided to you, right? So, being said that, I mean, solid principles. This is one of the core uh, things based on which from the days of Spring MVC, it is built on, right? Right. So every class that you see in Spring Boot is mostly single responsibility. Like, for example, let's take REST template, right? REST template, that's a single entity class, single responsibility. What it does, it just calls another REST API and gives you the response, right? Single responsibility. And that is something that even you would follow in your code, right? A lot of things that you define per class is for a particular responsibility. You wouldn't want to go ahead and change that. And also open and close principle. Like it provides you a lot of interfaces so that you can go ahead and extend your functionality, right? For example, your web MVC configurer, a very basic and most of you people would have used to add your global course configuration, right? So Web MVC configurer is an already available class which is open to extension but it's close to mutation. Right? You extend, you make it configurable for your use. But you can't actually go ahead and change those uh, actual implementations, right? That is there. And also list call substitution, right? So it basically almost all the classes that you inherit in Spring Boot mostly also does all the things that its superclass does, right? So basically, it's a one-on-one substitution with extras, right? I mean, this is something that even we would follow a lot of times in writing code, right? Very few times this is a bit wavy to for everyone to get their heads on, but most of the people would have already done this. Right? Interface segregation, right? So you write your services, implement your services, and you give the services exported onto another class via an interface. Right? You basically abstract it. What this allows you to do is something known as a decorator pattern. This is something that you would have widely heard in the Spring Boot terms, right? And also it is being cast upon a lot more other platforms these days, right? So basically, let's say you have one interface and you have two service classes implementing them, right? Now at runtime, with interface segregation, you can basically pick and choose which implementation you would want to use, right? And that being said, that is where dependency inversion comes into play. Right? Basically, your auto-wired principles, right? A lot of your auto-wired is basically your dependency inversion. It injects your dependency for you, right? And that is done via your interface segregation. A lot of times, you actually input auto wire your interface rather than your service class, right? The best example for this is your repository classes, right? Repositories are usually interfaces, right? So most of your CRUD repositories, Mongo repositories that you would have already used is an interface. You don't actually go ahead and inject a service class over there, right? You just import a repository interface and you go ahead with it. So that being said, and how are we contributing to GeekyAnts? As GeekyAnts contributing to Spring Boot community and what we are doing with it, right? These are a few things that we are using as of now in our organization. So most of our things are in cloud, right? So we are mostly focused on giving solutions on Spring Cloud. So we heavily use Spring Cloud Config, right? So this basically provides us a way to keep all our configs in sync, right? So probably these days we can also do it with a lot of things on your cloud providers, vaults, or even you can use Spring Cloud or HashiCorp Vault, right? But currently we are using Cloud Config. We also use OpenFame. This is mostly when we want to create an enterprise service bus kind of an implementation. So this is where we use this declarative REST implementation, right? Spring Cloud Functions. This is something that we are starting to push lot more these days for your set types or types of executions, right? So let's say you want to run an audit report every 24 hours, or you want to run a financial report every 24 hours. So your cloud function is very efficient to do that, right? A small microservice which runs only on a fashion. So that is where we are for those kind of use cases. We mostly are pushing into cloud functions, right? And Eureka is something that we use a lot these days, right? Service discovery has helped us create service meshes on a very large scale. It has also helped us scale up into very good numbers, right? And also we work with cloud contracts. I mean, this is probably a very low used component these days, right? But what it essentially does is it'll give you an abstraction stub, right? Let's say you want to run a mock server, right? Spring Cloud Contract will give that for you. I mean, it's a declarative contract, like you already have your open API spec and you want to create a set of mocks. This will provide that for you. And also with Spring Cloud Contract, you can also go ahead and uh, do real world load testing, right? It can simulate your load testing as well. So mostly we use it for mocking servers and we also use it for integration testing, right? And Cloud Commons is basically an utility package that we try to use as far as we can, right? So that this provides most of your common utilities in one single package that your Spring Cloud as a whole uses. Right? We are currently using this, but again, that is a mix of our own common utilities and the cloud common utilities, like. And we are also running Spring in a lot of different cloud environments. So we are running it on Azure, we are running it on GCP, we are running it on AWS, we are running it on Kubernetes, right? So most of the case scenarios we are leveraging on Spring Cloud platform itself. So we are using these plugins to go ahead and basically make it more native to the platform that we are building it on, right? So that it is able to talk to the components of the infrastructure itself more seamlessly, right? So, for example, if you want to talk to your Azure Key Vault, right? So, with Azure Cloud, Spring Cloud, it allows you to do managed identity authentications, which are passwordless, more secure, right? And it also gives a way to build out a lot of seamless integrations into the Azure platform itself, right? So that is where we are. And on the database part, these are a few things that we are extensively using these days. Spring Data JPA is probably the most commonly used. Probably everyone would have used at some point of a time for your SQL DBs, and the same goes for MongoDB, right? This is one of the more commonly used. And we also are using Redis for a lot of caching scenarios, and we also use Cassandra for a lot of high throughput database interactions, right? And also a few other components that we are using these days is Spring Security, but as of date we are more focusing on your Spring Identity, right? That is currently coming up. It can give you an open ID kind of an implementation. So, but as of date we are still using the Spring Security itself. So we are currently even migrating towards Spring GraphQL, the version one that has already come out, and we are already extensively using it, and is also in production and working really well for us, right? And Spring Sessions is also something that we are using to handle our contextual sessions while running into stateful applications. And Spring AQMP is something that we use to contact any one of our data brokers, right? Your message brokers. So we usually combine this with AQMP with one of your Spring Cloud platform providers. So something like Spring AQMP with Spring Cloud Azure or Spring AQMP with Spring Cloud GCP, right? So that we can talk to the infrastructure's native service bus, right? So these are a few things that we are doing as of date with Spring Boot, right? And we're also actively uh, communicating and collaborating with a lot of people on the community as well. You can find a lot of this active on the community, right? And as we spoke, right? So these are the few topics that we'll be talking in this particular meetup, right? So the first thing is about the GraalVM, right? It's mostly the hot topic these days, coming into its smaller footprint, faster execution capabilities, and all those things, right? So we're taking, uh, Dibyaprakash will be talking about that. Then we have value objects that Sumukh will be talking about, and we have Spring Security, right? So which Vikrant will be talking about, and we'll be talking about GraphQL as well, right? So yeah, without further ado, let's get started. Right? Thank you.
Thank you, Vasuki, for telling us so many things that we are doing in the Spring Boot community. All right, it's time to bring forward the first speaker of the day, Dibyaprakash. He's a senior software engineer here at GeekyAnts, and he loves to direct his enthusiasm into microservices and architectural planning. So today he's diving us deep into GraalVM. So let's hear more about it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Hi everyone. So I am Dibyaprakash Pradhan. I work as senior software engineer in GeekyAnts here. And first of all, thank you everyone for joining us today. And it's really nice to see you guys are participating in meetups. So yeah, let's get started. So our topic is diving deep into GraalVM, and we will talk about observability using Micrometer as well. Okay. So, as Vasuki told, like Spring Boot provides us a lot of like Spring Boot starters, you can say, like even if it's security or you want to build some like application which integrates database, or even if you are like looking for any other solution. So Spring Boot provides a lot of starters. Okay, so it basically helps us to like avoid boilerplates, but at the same time, it gives you a lot of like unused code, you say. Okay, even if you are not using some code, the starter will include that in your final package. Okay, so the problem is like it increases the like jar file size, you can say, and like not everyone of us like prefers big jar files, and that is a problem for some people. Okay, because of like we sometimes we restrict ourselves for infrastructure scaling, so we will try to understand like how GraalVM can solve that problem. Okay, so yeah, let's get started. Yeah. So first of all, like what is GraalVM? So you can say GraalVM is a like high performance runtime. It's like does the same thing like what JVM does, but in a different way. You can say like JVM, like using JVM, if you are like packaging one jar, then you can run it on top of JVM. But GraalVM is something like which creates native executables which can be executed in your native environment. So that is the difference, you can say. And yeah, so let's understand how it works. So it supports Java, Kotlin, Scala, and Groovy. So whichever language is like supported by JVM, GraalVM supports all those languages. And GraalVM provides two type of compilers. One is JIT and another one is AOT. So basically, this JIT is not the like exact one as the JVM provides. This is a better form of JIT, you can say. So yeah, GraalVM provides two options for you. So you can either choose JIT or AOT. So JIT is like, as you all know, it's just in-time compiler, like which basically JVM uses, like you can say Java hotspot VM uses. And AOT is something which is a part of GraalVM, you can say environment. And like the full form of AOT is like ahead of time compiler. And like as it says ahead of time, what it does is like it basically like before like runtime, it builds one native executable for you, so that like there will be no loading of like external classes or configurations during runtime. Okay, so that is the purpose. So we will just understand more about it in next ones. Yeah. So here I have listed few highlights about GraalVM. So you can say like great features of GraalVM. So first one is it starts first, and we will understand how it starts first, and what is the internal working of GraalVM, how it helps to start first. And next is low resource uses. So basically, if you are like creating any native executable using GraalVM, whenever you will run it, it will really use less resources of your infrastructure comparing to JVM based jar executables. Okay, so and next is it minimizes like vulnerability, like how it does, we will understand that in later. And last one is it provides you compact packaging. Okay, so first let's understand the start first feature. Okay, yeah. So here you can see we have the native image build process, how it builds the native image. So in the left side, you can see it takes input of all the classes from application, libraries, and VM, and it starts analyzing in a iterative way, you can say. Okay. So first it finds the point to analyze, then it runs the initializations, all the necessary initializations, then it does one heap snapshotting. Okay, so you might be like getting question like what is heap snapshotting here, what is the work of heap snapshotting. So basically GraalVM takes one snapshot of your heap, so that it can predict like how much resource will be required for that particular native executable, and it will allocate that much resource only, so that like extra like additional resources will not be wasted like in runtime. Okay, so next is it will analyze all these all your code first, okay, in an iterative way. So what it does is like this AOT like compiler like first finds your main class, and it considered your main class as the entry point your application. Okay, so first it runs one reachability test actually. So like from the main entry point, it start like analyzing where your functionalities goes. Okay, so you can say for an example, like you have some code declare like service IMPLs or some other like utils, okay, and you are not using that anywhere in your application, like from the flow or the controller to service layer, like you are not using that. So what AOT will do is like AOT will remove all those unused components like completely, okay, so that it can be a like smaller executable file. Okay, and yeah, so after doing all these steps, AOT writes your code in text section like of the native executable, which is your output, and also like image if it will put in data section. Yeah. So next is like let's understand like how these both compilers works. Okay. So first one is JIT. So as you can see, like it goes through a lot of process in order to create one jar. Okay. So sorry, in order to execute your jar, you can say first it loads the jar file from your disk, and then it uncompress the class files, verify class definitions, and execute in interpreter, like I have mentioned there, like this is 20x slower than the GraalVM, okay, and it impacts your like timing, startup time as well, you can say. And next, it will gather profiling feedback, then compile to machine code, and at last, finally, it will execute at peak performance. But if you will see the AOT compiler here, it will just load the executable from disk, and it will start executing at the peak performance. Yeah, so that was all about the start first, and like it really helps to start up your application in a very less time frame. And next is low resource usage. So let's understand how it works. Yeah, so here we will do the same comparison between JIT and AOT. So here you can see like we have many components in JIT, like garbage collector and VMs and runtime compiler, everything. And along with that, you have like dynamic code cache and metaspace class files and feedback component. You have application payload, okay, all this stuff. And if you will see AOT, it has like very minimal stuff. One is GC, application machine code, and application payload. Okay, so this is the like component structure, you can say, like in between these two compilers. Okay, so if you will see, yeah, so here I tried to provide one like resolution on memory scalability. So whenever you are scaling your application, so you can say like you are scaling your pod. So now if you are using JIT, then it will increase, like you can see these garbage collector and this BM and compiler. These are the only shared resources. Okay. So if you are increasing your like count, you can say replica set to 4, then only GC and VM will be shared in between all those 4 like replicas, and all other stuffs will be duplicated. Okay. And if you will see the AOT, it also shares the GC and machine code, but only thing which will be duplicated is the application payload. Okay. So you can like consider like how less resource it will use. Okay, in terms of memory scalability. Yeah. Next feature is like minimize vulnerability. So how it does, we will see. So yeah, so I have listed some points here. So as I said, like there will be no new unknown code can be loaded at the runtime, because it does the like AOT compilation, right? Ahead of time compilation, it gives you one native executable. So there will be no new unknown code can be loaded at runtime. So only paths proven reachable by the application are included. So like as I told, like it performs one reachability test. So it like checks which codes are like reachable. Okay, so if any other like unused codes are there which might like create one security risk for your application, it will just remove those. Okay, so and it will not allow you like anyone to like reach that particular point also. And next is reflection is disabled by default. So you can say like this is a positive point as well as one negative point. So as you know, like reflection helps out a lot in like Java coding, you can say. But yeah, it's disabled by default, but it provides you like option to configure like to enable reflections as well. Okay, so if you will provide instruction to GraalVM, so according to your instruction it will include those features. It's not like it will include by default. Okay. And yeah, so deserialization and only enabled for specified list of classes. So basically deserialization is also disabled by default for like custom classes, you can say. If you want to like enable deserialization, again you can just like give instruction to your GraalVM and it will do it for you. Yeah, that is how like it reduces like attack surface a lot. Okay. Yeah, the last one is compact packaging. So I will just show you one funnel chart here. So I have collected this data from one Spring official you can say, like they have performed live tests like using GraalVM, and this was the output. Okay, so on the right hand side, the like unit is MB. Okay, I forgot to mention. So first you can see. So like I have separated the you can say values with two colors, like red is for JVM and you can say green is for GraalVM. Okay, so in the first line you can see the Debian, like they have used Debian Slim and JDK 17, and the jar produced was a like size of was having size of 385 MB. Then they have used distroless Java 17 and it got reduced to 231. Those are like JVM use cases I'm saying. And next they have tried like distroless Java base with JLink, and again size got reduced to 74.9 MB. And like followed by that, like you can see 58.7. So that was the minimum like you can say possible size of your jar. Okay, so next we starts with like GraalVM based executables. So you can see here we have used distroless Java base. So one static executable we have produced, and that was like having a size of 39 MB, and you can say 25 MB followed by that 21. And at last, if you will see, like it was scratch compressed. Okay, only the used codes were included in that particular native executable, and the size is only 5.4 MB. So yeah, it's surprising because we cannot like do that using JVM, right? Yeah. So here are some test cases we have performed, and the top one is using this MVN Spring Boot run command, and you can see the application takes like 1.643 seconds to get started. And the second one is like you can say GraalVM native executable. So we have just run the command and it got started in zero point 0.3 seconds. And like these two applications were same. Okay, so you can clearly see the difference between the startup time. So yeah, one more thing I would like to mention, this is just a normal application without having like any major functionalities. So when you will add the functionality to your application, like if you are using any database, or if you are like building a lot of APIs and you are including some heavy components, then a startup time will be usually higher in like normal run method, right? So it might take 20 or 30 seconds. But now like you will see like here you can see very less difference. But when the startup time of JVM is like taking 25 seconds or something, that time GraalVM will take 3 or 4 seconds, I can say. Okay, so you guys can like just give it a try and you can check with your use case. Yeah. So next is so this is the like resource usage graph, you can say. So left side is JVM, Java Hotspot VM. So when that particular application started, this is the like usage graph, you can say. Okay, so the red spikes are showing the CPU usage and the blue one is showing like RAM usage. So using JVM, you can see the spikes on time of startup because it loads a lot of runtime configurations. Okay, so it will obviously use your resources. And if you will see GraalVM, there is a really like stable spikes. So you can see like it use your CPU less as well as your RAM. Yeah. So that was all about like GraalVM, and you guys can just give a try to GraalVM. So anyone of you have used like GraalVM? No one? Okay, just give it a try, and like it might not suit your use case, or it might suit your use case, but yeah, just give it a try. Yeah, I didn't include the like drawbacks of using GraalVM because I want you guys to give it a try. So yeah, next, so let's talk about observability. So observability is like something you can say the ability to monitor, or to you can say, how you can, so like your application is running somewhere and you don't want to disturb the running process of your application. You don't want to open server and check the console logs. Okay, so and like by using external, like being the external part of like accessing, you can collect some data from your application, matrices and logs, you can say. So like for each API education, how much time it's taking, like the trace points, like where exactly your request went, like when it hits your application, and what happened to that like request. Okay, if error is there, then what is the reason of that error, and in which component that error is produced. Okay, so without if you want to see that without opening your console logs or something like that, so you can directly like use observability. And we have one like provider is like called as Micrometer. Yeah. So what is Micrometer? Micrometer is a library, you can say. It simplifies the collection and reporting of application matrices by providing consistent dimensional first. So what is dimensional first? Like it doesn't look for only one dimension. It means like it doesn't look only for error logs or normal logs, you can say, or matrices. It looks into all the dimensions. It gathers the data in a proper like structured format and it gives you back. And yeah, so that is it. And yeah, it helps you like a lot in terms of troubleshooting your application or like optimizing your software. Yeah. Next is Micrometer is in Spring Boot, and Micrometer Observation API is a like new type of API, as they say, and this allows us to hide the low-level APIs such as metrics, logging, and tracing. So these three are like different components. So for metrics, you might use some different component. For logging, you might use some different component, native logging or asynchronous logging, distributed logging, I can say. And for tracing also, you might use different, like you can use GeekyAnts for tracing or something like that. But a Micrometer provides you all these things like in one place. So they call it as observation instead of calling three words. So how it works? So first of all, like we can include these dependencies like from io.micrometer. So you can include core for core functionality, and you can include micrometer tracing if you want to like enable more tracing functionality in your application. So first, you will create one observation registry here, and then you will create one observation object, and like you can just mention the like identifier, like, as I mentioned sample here. So you can start the observation by calling the start method. So there are two ways like to write the code you want to observe. So the top one is like you can use this try catch and finally for writing the code which you want to observe. And or simply you can use this like dot observe like lambda functions. Okay, and this is the like flow, you can say, like which shows like if it started, then first it will be stopped, it will start. So this is the life cycle flow, you can say. And if any error is there, it will say like send and collect the error. And next is like scope, like life cycle. And there is two, like one is open, scope open, and scope closed. So this can be done multiple times, and scopes can be nested. So it will be keep on nesting the scopes for your observability point of view. Yeah. So Yeah, that was it. Thank you so much. Do you have any questions? Yeah, yeah, I think we can take questions at last. Thank you.
Thank you, Dibyaprakash. That was a very insightful presentation. Hello. Yeah, that was a very insightful presentation on creating native images using GraalVM. Let's call upon the next speaker, Vikrant Pratap Singh. He's a backend developer at Skillovilla. He loves digging into new concepts and tools, and he's sharing his insights on Spring security improvements. Over to you, Vikrant.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Am I audible? Hello. Yeah, fine. So yeah, first and foremost, thank you, GeekyAnts team to organizing this event and having me here. Uh, I will a little information about myself. I'm a backend developer, as she informed you. So I'm working in Skillovilla. I'm a 2023 grad, and I will be speaking about Spring Security improvements in a Spring Security 6 version that has been released earlier. So yeah, let's continue with the topic. So Spring Security, what is Spring Security? That's first question, right? So what is Spring Security? So the basic answer is Spring Security is a built-in model provided in our Spring framework that allows us to secure our application from outside intrusions, as you can say. And it's a very customizable package that can be used in our application to secure our resources. Okay, so it has certain functionalities such as authentication, authorization, and it also protects us from common exploits such as cross-site forgery, request forgery, CSRF, and many things. So going further, as we are talking about authentication and authorization, so authentication, if you talk about authentication, it's something that allows a user, like we make use of authentication to check whether the user is valid or not before letting him enter in our ecosystem. Okay, and on the other hand, authentic authorization. So how authorization works is we ensure like suppose we have a 10 or 20 set of resources on our website and we want a specific set of users to access only 10 of the resources that are available on our application. So we give the authorization of only access to those resources that are there in that are accessible for a specific user. So this is how authorization works. Going further, we'll see the security architecture, Spring security architecture, how it works, and what is the how it is implemented in the security environment application. Sorry, Spring security environment. So yeah, this is a diagram. So we'll be seeing this security implementation in respect of backend server, like when you request hits our backend server API. So let's suppose, first of all this, suppose you started your application. So if you have enabled this Spring security feature, so at first you will get a form, or if you're using a form-based login, you'll get a form that will ask you for username and password. So let's suppose client has given his username and password, and we'll see how this username and password is going through all the authentication process and coming back and giving the user the access of our application. So let's suppose user has given his username and password in the request. So first it will come to our delegating filter proxy. So what it does is it's internally a set of filters before it hits our backend servers, not servers, backend implementations. So what it does is it creates a authentication request object that will have some set of fields such as is authenticated. So after creating a authentication request object, this delegating filter proxy doesn't have the capability to authenticate the user. Okay, so what it does is it creates an authentication request body with the username and password that is coming through the client request, and then pass it to authentication manager. Okay, so this authentication manager on the third point, it's nothing but an interface. Okay, and it has a method called authenticate.
So this authenticate method can authenticate the user. Okay, but the point is authentication manager is interface. So it does not have any implementation to check whether the user is a valid user or not. So at this point, it makes use of this provider manager. So this is an implementation of authentication manager interface where it checks the authentication request object coming through the authentication manager and verifies the type of authentication the client is trying to do. So suppose here we are using username and password. So the provider manager first checks the type of authentication provider that is capable of handling this request. So in our application, we can have multiple type of authentication provider. It can be a token-based authentication. It can be a username and password-based authentication, and even OAuth authentication. So first it checks the user request is capable of handling which type of authentication provider. So suppose the authentication provider right now, based on this diagram, if the user is passing username and password, the authentication provider here is this username and password based authentication provider. So the provider manager passes this request authentication request object to authentication provider, and now the authentication provider has the job to fetch the data from the database and check the credentials passed by the client and verify it whether the user is a correct user or not. So at this point, the authentication provider requests the details from the user service and matches the client's request coming through authentication request object and then verifies it. So at this place, based on my assumption, the user has given the correct authentication and password. So here what will happen is authentication provider will create a authentication response object and then pass it to the provider manager. And later, the provider manager will pass the same request object to the authentication part that is available in a delegating filter proxy. So at this point, the client has been authenticated. We have verified the user is already existing in our database, and now we have to make him we have to allow him to access our resources that is in our application. So after this, at the step of 10, what we are doing is we are making use of the security context holder, and we are setting this authentication object in the security context holder. So the question is, what is security context holder? So what it does is it keeps track of all the authenticated users that are there in our application. So right now, suppose this authentication response object we have got, and now we are setting it in the security context holder. It will make sure suppose he's going for a next, like he's going within your application and trying to access a different source. So we should not send him to again on the same login sign up flow, right? Because he already authenticated. So this security context holder makes sure once the user is authenticated, we have to pass him further in a process. If you want to access some stuff, you want to see his profile, you want to set some values, like he want to buy something in a e-commerce environment. So he should be able to do that rather than going login sign up again and again. So security context holder holds the data of the authenticated user. I hope this is clear, and we'll go with the further slides. The same thing, how it works, the filter intercepts requests and just goes through the same flow. The same thing is written here. I will pass out further. Improvements. So here we are coming on improvements of Spring Security 6. So Spring Security 6 is a major release in last few months or years, like 1 year back, I think. So there are some major features that has been added in Spring Security 6. And if you're trying to make use of Spring Security 6 in our upcoming projects or the currently existing projects, we have to make some changes to be compatible with the security perspective that they have given. So as example, they have deprecated this web security configure adapter class. So earlier, what we used to do is when we had to define the security of our application, we used to extend this web security configure adapter class, and then you make use of this configure method to define our endpoints and giving them a specific accesses, like which APIs will be open to public, which will be which must be authenticated, and all these parts. So now this is deprecated. And the second point is introduction to security filter chain. So once it is deprecated, they have to give some other things to configure our authentication part, right? So here comes the security filter chain. So this is a new class that has been provided by Spring Security 6, where we can define our configuration properly. So what we have to do is we have to make use of the security filter chain bean and create our configuration. And then we have to define our rules. Like suppose right now, suppose we have a 20 or 30 set of APIs. You want certain APIs to be accessible by a certain type of users that have a specific role. So that thing you can configure in Spring Security 6. We'll see further. I have an example coming up. I will just show you how we can configure this part. We'll go with the next slide. So this is improved support for OAuth 2.0 and OpenID Connect. So Spring Security 6 has improved the support for these two authentication processes. where OAuth 2.0 is mostly the Google authentication, and where like suppose you want to authenticate yourself from a different source rather than going with the Spring Security or normal flow, you can do that too. And they have improved the authentication part. Okay, and then we'll go to the next feature. So next feature for securing reactive applications. So reactive applications is something where the application makes use of these web sockets and synchronous HTTP requests, where we don't have to restrict user from currently executing thread. So what happens is in the very basic level, reactive application is something that have non-blocking, that supports non-blocking IO. So suppose you are accessing an application, and now you have if you're using OAuth 2.0. So the Google, suppose you went to the Google authentication part, you clicked on that Google authentication part, you went to the Google server, and then you verify yourself, and then you return back to application. So this kills your primary execution thread. So to improve this part, they have improved the they have introduced some other features that we will see further. I think I have mentioned it earlier. I think coming slides, I will just show you. Okay, so this comes with the migration requirement. So yeah, so Spring Security 6. So suppose we are like most of the people right now are using Spring older versions, even Spring older versions and the security older versions too. And what if we are trying to move from the older versions to a newer versions? These are some of the checklists that we have to follow to be compatible with the newer versions of Spring Security. Okay, so as mentioned here, that must use Java 8 or higher. So this means if you are using Spring Security 6, you must use Java 8 version or higher, like JDK 17 at least, and must use Spring Boot 2.7 or higher. So this is the case when you are using, if you are using 2.7, you can use a lower version of Java, but if you are using Spring Boot any version more than 3, you have to make sure you are using JDK 17 and over versions. And the third point is make you must use the security filter chain bean instead of web security configure adapter. As we know, this class has been deprecated, so we must use this security filter chain class to configure our authentication part. And then this must use the enable web security annotation. So this is annotation that is replacing our configuration annotation from the security class. So if you're using this security filter chain bean, you have to annotate it with the enable web security annotation to make it compatible with the configurations, and let the Spring Boot allows you to have this configuration in your system, in your application. And the next is must use the authorized request method. So they have, in short, if you're using making use of the Spring Security 6, you must use the authorized request method to define your endpoints, and then verify, then allow them to have certain roles, and based on that they can configure. And the next point is must use the expression-based access control instead of pre-authenticated access control. So what it means is it's mainly for the reactive applications. Actually, I don't have much context about reactive application, but the very basic on the very basic level is something as pre-authenticated access control is something. But like suppose you are using OAuth to control authentication type in your application. So when you click on the Google based authentication part, you go on the Google website, verify yourself, come back, and then continue with the further flow. So in that case, the Spring Security 6 is ensuring us to make use of this expression-based access control rather than pre-authenticated, because it will not kill the primary execution thread, and it will continue with the same flow of execution rather than going on a different website, confirming and then coming back and continuing with the security purpose. Then the next point is must use the OAuth client bean. So this is something, but they have deprecated this OAuth client configure class. Instead of that, we have to make use of this OAuth client to configure our OAuth client based authentication process. Okay, let's see an example of implementation of this Spring Security 6 and Spring Boot 3 version. Let's see how we can configure our beans and classes to be compatible with the Spring Security 6 implementation. So yeah, so as you can see, this is a Spring Security class where I'm using, I have annotated this class as enable web security. So it, at default, it enables the security on our application. And I have created a bean with security filter chain, and it's taking parameters HTTP security. And later I'm using this HTTP object, I'm using this authorized HTTP request, and then using this Lambda to define those endpoints and have given specific roles to those endpoints. So suppose I have written authorized request dot request matcher home casual dot has role user. So what it means is this endpoint, especially the slash home slash casual, will be accessible to the users, accessible to the clients that have a specific role as user. If any other person or client having different role cannot access this endpoint, same way we have this home admin that will be accessible only by person who is having a role as admin. Same way, I've written request matcher home slash public. So this is a public API, so it will be available for any person who is using this, using our application. And at the end, I have notated this dot form login. So it will make use of this form login method to take the credentials from user and pass it to the backend server. And the next slide. So yeah, so storing the details of the user, I'm making use of this user details service. It's an in-memory detail manager. So I have created two users. One is a casual user. I've given my name, and the role is user. And the second one is admin. User title is admin. So I have created an admin user having roles as admin. So I will show you how the API works when we are using different roles to log in and then trying to figure out which API we have to click on. So this is a controller layer where I have created three APIs. One is for casual user, and like it's a having a role user. Any client having a role user can access this normal slash normal API. If not, he can't access. The second one is has role admin. So same way, if user has admin role, then only he can access this API, and the public is available for everyone. So let's suppose I'm login as a Vikrant, like the normal user. So first thing, if I try to hit any API, I will get this form. I have to put up my credentials. Then I click on sign in. I will be able to access the API that is annotated as casual user because I'm a normal user. My role is given as user, so I will be able to access this only this API and a public API. So same way, if I go for public slash public, I'm able to access the public API. But what if I try to go with the slash admin API? So yeah, so being a user, having a role user, I can't access this API having slash admin because I don't have the role that is required for this API. So it is failing here. The next slide. So yeah, so what I did log out and then again logged in as an admin, and then I tried to hit the same API slash admin. So I was able to access this, and I'm getting the response whatever it is, and so yeah, so this is how the underlying security works, and these are the new features that has been introduced in Spring Security 6. We have this has role. I think it's very important and very useful for us to having this has role functionality because we can define certain. Suppose we have an application having multiple endpoints, and we want some endpoints to be used only by admins. We can just give them a role and assign all those APIs to them. We don't have to create our optional auths and mandatory auths and basic auths, all those things to handle by different use cases. So yeah, this is how it is handled now. There are a lot of things to explore in Spring Security. I'm not going much deeper in that, but yeah, we can explore. It's a new feature, so it has multiple functionality. It will be improving further too. So yeah, this is from my side, and this is the last slide. I have listed out the sources that I was using, and yeah, that's it. So I will hand up the stage to the next person. I think it's end from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Vikrant, for that interesting talk on Spring Boot 3 and Spring Security 6. Let's take a quick break. We'll be back in another 20 minutes. All right. So, network. Oh, hi, we are back again. Okay, let's head into our next talk. We have Sumukh Bhandarkar. He's a software engineer at Walmart Global Tech. He has over 6 years of experience in the Hello World arena, and he's an active Toastmaster, and he loves to play chess. I'm glad that you could make time for us today. He's going to talk about value object patterns for Spring Boot. So the stage is yours, Sumukh.
Thank you. Thank you for the warm introduction. Okay. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Anybody sleepy? No, right? Wonderful. Okay. How many of you have heard value objects before? What is value objects? Nobody? You have heard it. Good. Anybody else? Nice. Since majority of you don't know, this presentation becomes easier for me now. I'll have lesser questions. Okay, cool. Before we jump into what is value objects, what are design patterns? Basic interview question. What's a design pattern? Anyone? Set of best practices. Okay. That's right. Anyone else? What's a design pattern? Go ahead. Okay. Why design patterns? Set of tools, a set of instructions, a blueprint or something is fine. That's a design pattern. Why design patterns? To develop a quality code, right? Anything else? Why design patterns? It's a framework. By the way, tell me one thing. Can I say that a design pattern is like an algorithm? Is it or is it not? Okay. So design pattern, as I told you, and as you guys have already said, it is a blueprint. It is a framework, which is a solution to a known problem. It is not an algorithm. It is not a code. Okay. And one such design pattern, you have come across various design patterns, and one such design pattern is value objects. Okay. And it's a very simple design pattern, which most of you have probably used it before. If you have worked on Spring, you've probably used it, but you probably have used it, but you do not really know what is the importance and what is the significance of value objects in your application. So I'll be telling you more on what is this value objects and how it adds value to your code, how it makes your code much simpler. Guarding and too much guarding, it says. Now, in your code, in your application, somebody spoke about Spring security. Vikrant spoke about Spring security, right? So what do you do when you have an input and you need to validate it? You write some if blocks to check what the input is doing or what it shouldn't be doing, probably throw some exceptions, have some custom exceptions here and there. And what else do you do? How else do you validate your code? You have null pointer checks maybe, right? And these are all simple things that you add into your code, and this makes your code slightly more tedious to read, slightly more difficult to analyze or compile, and eventually it might bring out more bugs in your code. As although you're trying to reduce your bugs, eventually it might increase the number of bugs in your code because you're doing a lot of manual checks and manual validations throughout your classes. And to prevent this problem, we have got the solution, and that is value objects. So what you'll be doing is inside one single class, we will have multiple other objects we're using encapsulation. And if the object is being instantiated properly, then all well and good. And if it's not, then you can throw whatever exceptions that you want. We'll go with a straightforward example now. What data type will you use for storing some phone number, let's say? Long? Who said long? Okay. Is he correct? Is long okay? String? What else? Any other big integer? Anything else that you can use for a phone number? Which is correct? Which is the most suitable one? String? Why string? Because it's not necessary numbers. Tomorrow I can have +91 or something, right? Now, what are the limitations? What are the limitations of having string as a data type for phone numbers? valid or invalid, right? So, for example, you can have anybody can input something like ABC or -123. This can also be a phone number. So, what you will do in a general case scenario, you'll probably put a check that the number should not be less than 0 and it should be a character, or it shouldn't be a character. So these are the simple checks that you'll probably put into your code and ensure that the phone number is valid. So let's assume that there's a user and there's a phone number. So you'll put up basic simple checks and try to say that this phone number is valid. But using value objects, this whole process can be made much simpler, much easier to read. Okay, this is, let's say this is a phone number value object and very simple instantiation of the class. So I've used an annotation at value here. So at value, make sure that this is immutable and it is comparable, which means that you have got the hash code and equals method. Even the toString method is included. So that's why I've got the at value. Value object should always be immutable. And it should have it's suggested a best practices that it is comparable. So in the phone number VO, I will have some methods for validating the phone number. Here in this particular example, we are making use of Google phone number library. Validate phone number, it will throw whatever exceptions. Basically, this whole thing comes under a class called phone number VO. So that tomorrow, whenever you want to make use of this class, instantiate this class, it's much easier. Instead of having pojos or beans separately and then you instantiate them or validate them. Okay. And you can use this particular VO directly into your controllers. But then there is a issue. Can anyone look at this slide and tell me what is possibly the issue with using VOs or using value objects? So this is a simple controller, some post mapping, get mapping, request param. Here I'm using string phone number. Instead of string, you can replace that with the phone number VO. What do you think will be the issue if I use a phone number VO here? Serialization. Serialization. So Spring does not. So Spring uses Jackson for serialization, and by default, it does not. It cannot serialize custom objects. So in this cases, this is the issue which that will come up with when you use any custom class. In this case, the VO is your custom class. So you'll have to write your own, implement your own serializer, maybe a third implementation of it, and come up with your own serializer to get the JSON or whatever is the input, the output that you need. So for custom serialization, again, there is a very, it's a lengthy code that you can check out in my Git repo. I added the bit.ly here. So to summarize, you can read here, the value object is a reference to the object. We'll use the value object, and the internal structure only matters when you're trying to convert it into a into some sort of decoding, encoding, serialization, or when you're trying to put it in a database. It is immutable and it has best suggested to be comparable. So now tell me, how many of you have used value objects? Pretty much all of you have probably used value objects, and you see how it is one of the most commonly used, lesser known design patterns in Spring, and suggested to use value objects as much as possible because of all the advantages that we have seen so far. That's about it. Thank you.
That was an amazing talk, Sumukh. That was on. It was on one of the most important concepts of tactical domain-driven design. So let's head over to our fourth speaker. We have Mohamed Farhan. He's a software engineer here at GeekyAnts. He has a passion for building amazing things and is dedicated to delivering high-quality solutions for complex challenges. He's talking about how to build a GraphQL API with Spring Boot. So over to you, Farhan.
Thank you, Sanna. So, good evening, everyone. So, I am Mohamed Farhan from GeekyAnts. I am a software engineer. So, today I will be talking about utilizing the GraphQL in Spring Boot, like how we can integrate GraphQL APIs in Spring Boot. So, this is how my talk is going to be, like what is the timeline. First, we will see what is GraphQL, first of all, and then how we can integrate with Spring Boot. Also, we will see how we can handle the errors that are happening, because every API we are creating, error handling is important. And we will see what is scalar types in GraphQL. Okay. So what is GraphQL? So GraphQL is a query language, you can say, but what it will query is your APIs. So query language is in the sense, every time we say query, we are like fetching some data in a way we wanted, correct? So GraphQL is a query language for API. So for getting a data, you will call one API. What if you want to fetch only some of the data using that API? That is GraphQL, simply. So it is more flexible, and the whole control will be given to the front end, like what exactly you need to fetch and everything. And the most important thing is, every time we create a API, we will give a contract to the front end that this is the API, and you need to you will get this type of response and what will be the type and everything. You need to create a separate documentation for that. But here in GraphQL, whenever you create one API, the documentation is actually like automatically created. Like it's like, you can say, Swagger UI. So how it is different from GraphQL and REST API? First of all, this over and under data fetching, like what is it actually? Over and under data fetching, like if you like, let's say an app, you are logged in, and then at one page, you just need one of the phone number of an employee. For that, if you are creating a REST API controller, you have to create another API just for giving that phone number, correct? So now in GraphQL, just for that employee entity, you can just create one GraphQL query and give it to the front end. Now they can query what they need in that employee entity, correct? So this will also reduce our number of endpoints we are creating. And yeah, this is pretty much it. And what is predetermined structure is, now every time we give a contract, I said, right? So for REST APIs, we will be giving the contracts like, this will be the structure, it will be giving the return type, and these are all the structure that will come as output, and what is the error handling and everything. In GraphQL, we have a predetermined structure like this. This will be the output and this will be the type to the front end as a documentation. They will get it in the playground. We'll see how they will get it. And so this is just a like normal, I created one image like how it will be. And you can see, like if we have moon, sky, earth as different entities, we will be creating separate controllers for it, and then separate APIs for it. As here we will have a GraphQL layer where all the entities we can merge it and have a query where the front end can query it. And now we talked about what is GraphQL. Now we'll see how we can implement that with Spring Boot. Before 2.7.0 version, there was like no official starter pack as a dependency for GraphQL. We have to use one third-party dependencies for using GraphQL in Spring Boot. Now we have this GraphQL starter pack in Spring.io directly. We can just include this dependency and start using the GraphQL. Okay. What exactly changed is nothing. We now got all the annotation-based coding right now for the GraphQL. Yeah. So this is the important part of the GraphQL, schema.graphqls. So everything that documentation I am saying, right, you will be creating it here only. So first we will have a input type. Like For if you are creating on to do, we will be having create to do as API, like what you need to get it as input. This will be the type, and what you have to send as a input, we will say. And you can see there is a like one exclamation mark, which will say that this is a required one, it cannot be null. And this will be the return types as a interface, like what it will return. This we will be defining it in the schema.graphqls. And we will now create the queries. So queries, in the sense, uh, you can say it's most probably for as a get call of REST API. This is to fetch the data from the databases, like only fetching of the data. Here we have seen get all to dos, get by to do ID and everything. And we have mutations. Mutation is a post call of REST APIs, you can say. You can say like using query also, you can modify the data of databases, as like previously you said, design patterns, best coding practices. Like you should know when you are calling API that you are like modifying some data in the database. So we will be using mutation for that. And yeah, so that is a schema that you have defined, like how the API is going to be. Now we need to say to the Java code what what is the API going to be. Like we have to create a controller layer and everything. So we need to match this schema and our controller layer. So we will having, as I said, the dependency have been came for as a starter pack. We got everything as annotation based here. Now we have query mapping, which will return all the like to do service will return all the to dos. You just have to, this value is the in schema.graphqls you would have created this query as a get all to dos. You can remove this value also if the method name is same as the query. And mutation mapping, same as it, value create to do is will be there. And here you can see we have argument annotation, which will be a input basically. And what is subscription mapping? So we have seen query and post as a mutation, get and post call. Now subscription mapping is a web sockets, you can say. This is a long polling of GraphQL layer, where any data that is being changed on backend, how we can say to the front end simply, because front end can talk to the backend, but backend cannot. So subscription mapping, if they are subscribed to this mapping, they can get the whenever there is a to do gets added, I need a notification in the front end, then this subscription mapping will do it. So the moment you added a GraphQL starter pack dependency, you will get this GraphQL IQL playground, where all the schemas and everything will be defined here only. Yeah, as in the side also, you can see there will be a documentation as well, like what all the APIs that are present and what it will return, and what is the return type of those, and what is the structure of those as well. So yeah, and here you can see there we have write our query. And if you don't mention, like you don't want the completed, you can just remove it. It will just give you the ID, title and description, nothing else. Same as goes for everything. And we have seen in schema.graphqls, there was one exclamation mark. That means that you cannot ignore it. Like if you, that is like a required thing for that API. Whenever you're calling that API, it will be returned, means then you have to call that API with that query only the whole time. And same goes for mutation and subscription mapping as well. Same. We seen the schema.graphql query that mutation and type everything. It will be same goes for it. Now let's go into error handling. So for error handling, we have two interfaces. One is data fetcher exception resolver adapter, and another one is subscription exception resolver adapter. Because query and mutation are HTTP protocols, and subscription is a WebSocket protocol, so we need to handle it differently. So I just have an example code of how you can handle this error. Like based on what kind of exception is happening, you can modify the error that is being like sent to the front end. But before that, GraphQL is a you can say strictly typed API language. You can say GraphQL itself has a one error handling interface as it is. Whenever there is an error happen, it will actually give you the what kind of error happened and in what location and everything. It will automatically give you to modify even more that like custom messages and everything we will be having like this, and this will be the structure that what is the error we are getting and everything. And scalar types, so this is a strictly typed, so we have to define every types as well, right? So what if we want some custom type, like what we need some new type as a date and date time, local date time, everything. So we have one third party dependency, you can say, as extended scalars. You can use this and just create a configuration for that, like what are the extended scalars you need as date, date time, JSON object, whatever you want, and just define it in the schema.graphql as scalar is date. Then you can start using it in your schema.graphqls. It will automatically convert and serialize it. And yeah, that's it. These are the references I took. You can scan if you want.
Thank you, Farhan. That was a very informative talk and detailed, and demonstrated how to combine two technologies to create powerful and flexible APIs. Uh, all right. So I hope you guys are having a great time because we are not done yet. Fix up the stage for panel discussion. All right. We'll have the two. We'll have Vikrant and Sumukh, Dibyaprakash and Vasuki for panel discussion. All right. Okay, thank you.
Okay. I see a lot of new faces also have joined since I speak, right? Uh, okay. So basically we're opening up for any one of the questions, right? So you can basically fire in all the questions that you had bottled up till now, right? So yeah, so we have Sumukh, uh, we have Vikrant, we have Dibyaprakash, and myself, Vasuki Vardhan, right? We'll be taking any one of the questions that you will be having, right? So yeah, you can start if any one of you has any questions. No questions. And everything was that clear. Like you understood every single thing on what everyone spoke about. Nice. Okay. But either way, I have a few. Uh, yeah, they are handling it. Any questions on online?
No.
No. Okay. So, okay. Either way, I have a few questions, right? To start off with the very simple topic that we took up, right? Value objects, right? So, how deeply, I mean, are you guys using it, right? I mean, that is something that is inherently built in a lot of these validations, right? We don't really go ahead and think through it a lot, right? JSON parse exceptions or integer parse exceptions. And this is something that we come across way too often at runtime, right? So, yeah, I mean, how deeply have you guys used building out your own value objects?
Okay. So I believe value objects inherently is there in every other dependency, and it's a very common framework that you see in Spring Boot or even otherwise.
Huh.
And we obviously use it a lot of times. It's what my intention here is today was primarily to tell that how important is it and how you can use it going forward as well. You don't really stick to the pojos or the DSLs, the basic
Yeah.
Javas.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, right? So, I mean, phone number is the best example, right?
Right.
We can take for in terms of validation.
Right.
A lot of times when we push some data into, yeah, even though it is statically typed, strongly typed, right? Yeah, data type is being validated, but the value inside itself is not being validated. A lot
Right.
of times we face these issues when in at runtime.
Yes.
Some junk value came in, data type somehow matched, it goes into the database or it gets propagated somewhere else, and
Right.
we are stuck with that entire loop.
Something as simple as in India, for example, your phone number, let's say 8867141252, is same as +918867141252.
Exactly.
So something like this, when you try to query it, you can probably easily handle this when you are able to write a probably custom parser or within a value object. If you're able to handle this better, it makes it easier and easier for the code to understand and to read the code.
Yeah, it also creates a lot of clear abstractions, right?
Exactly.
As I said, that is also one. Jackson is one of the things, right? You
Yes.
need to register that as a module
Right.
before we do anything. Okay, cool. And coming to things on Spring security, right? A lot of things that you actually mentioned about using JWT roles and all these things, right? So, what kind of a context that you were talking about in terms of Spring uses context, right? Your solid context going through the entire point, right? So, on what particular grounds where you see that Spring security could probably do a bit better? Like there might be case scenarios where you would have found that okay, this is something that I wanted, but is not available, kind of a scenario. Have you
Uh,
ever faced that?
Mhm. Actually, it's very use case based, you can say. So suppose you are making use of this JRT authentication token for your project. So if you are making use of that and implementing Spring security for the specific purpose, you can handle it properly. But suppose sometime happens is like suppose you don't have much clarity on the Spring security filter chains. Like right now they have introduced this security filter chain, so it has multiple implementation types, right? You can have this GRT authentication, you can have this DAO based authentication, and all these things. So you have multiple options, but the very first thing is you have to choose the correct option that suits your requirement, right? So if you are able to do that, you have to figure out if you want this specific user based, like user and password based authentication, you have to go with the password based authentication. So I think the clarity on the top level where what you want to use makes you more clear about how you can implement the security in your application. So yeah, that will be my.
Because that was one such use case we had, right? That a lot of times we go ahead. A lot of times our main use case basically boiled down to OAuth 2.0 or OpenID Connect. Right? So something very simple as connecting to Okta for validation, or even Google Auth for validation. Right now with Cloud Connect, Java CFE, and we have ways to do that. That was one particular use case where we found that just Spring Security itself didn't actually do the job for us. So that was where my question was. And last but not least, coming to your case scenario, right? I mean, for me, that one particular point where you showed that there is a possibility to bring down your entire Java application down to 5. Now that really piqued my interest, right? Now that is something that we are talking very close to C and Rust kind of scenarios, right? 5 MB, 4 MB, these are some things that we usually find in those extreme low level things, right? So, I mean, have you ever used GraalVM VM up to that level? Or that is something that it is still in experimentation?
Yeah. So I can say I have another use case where the image size was just 1.5 MB. Also, I didn't included that, but it got reduced up to 1.5 MB as well. Yeah, and I have used GraalVM. Like I have used two forms of GraalVM. One is you can directly use build specs, which comes with Spring Boot. Else you can install GraalVM in your infra first, and you can directly run the GraalVM native commands. So yeah, we can do that. And yeah, I have deployed few services using GraalVM, and the performance is really good. So I'll tell you one scenario. You don't want higher RAM architectures. Okay, you are stick to 1 GB RAM architecture. Okay, I'll just give you one example of EC2 instance. Okay, so if you are deploying your application over there, so it will use, like if it's a normal application, it will use like 400 MB or 500 MB of RAM for sure. Okay, but if you are and after that you will have no space for deploying any other application in that particular server. Okay, that's impossible. It will crash basically. What you can do is like you can use GraalVM, and you will see the difference really really well. Okay, like you can even deploy the same type of application like 3 times, like 3 applications you can deploy in single 1 GB instance. So difference is a lot, and it's really good. But again, I'll say it has some drawbacks as well. If you have used condition on property, right? Like if this bin is not available, then inject this bin, right? So we have one understand that will not work with GraalVM because it compiles ahead of time, and it doesn't allow you to inject something in runtime. So
So,
yeah, again we
but
can define that in instruction JSON of GraalVM. Yeah.
so you have so basically something. I mean, the ones that I am particularly using is a combination of AOT and JIT, right? But the maximum that we have gone currently is going with distroless CDK,
Yeah.
right? The second stage, to what you showed,
Correct.
right? That is where we are at right now, right? And mostly I mean, that is a very particular use case, conditional properties.
Yeah.
This is something that is probably widely used in enterprise, right?
True.
you would need to have failover scenarios. So that is where probably we are using JIT,
Correct.
GraalVM's JIT, and also this thing. But yeah,
Okay.
definitely that the very next thing on Monday morning that I'm doing is trying out that 5 MB thing.
Yeah.
That is something that we would want to do. If we get that, then we mostly have solved a lot of our resource issues
Yeah. Correct.
that we're facing right now. Right? Okay. You guys have any questions to the speakers? I think it off of your mind. All right, good.
Okay.
Okay. I mean, again, back to you guys. You guys have any questions? Yeah.
Hi, I have a question regarding GraalVM. Like, what are the specific use cases where you have used it? And since you mentioned that it's lightweight, so on what features we need to compromise on? Since you mentioned some of the features which are not present there, so what are the things which we need to compromise, and what are the limitations? That's I wanted to know.
Yeah. So in some scenarios, like there will be some like dynamic code modification. You can say like you are injecting some like other component in runtime to your application. That will be strict. Like okay, because like if you'll see like AOT does the same thing. Like it's a feature you can say with some kind of limitation. It makes one native executable package. Okay, and you don't have any entry point to push any code. Okay, so that particular feature you will miss. And as I said, like condition on property, so like you cannot direct like really determine in the runtime which bean to use. Okay, so these are like specific scenarios you can say, like this will not be like creating problems for you every time. So yeah, after considering these points, you can just choose like you if you want to use JVM or GraalVM. What was your other question?
Sorry.
What was your other question?
Yeah, this one only,
Okay.
like
Yeah.
limitations. Okay, thanks.
Hello. Am I audible? Hello.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I'm Sabarish. So my question is like, in the current world, like the technologies are coming up, adding a lot of features, right, and coming up with new releases very frequent. So even today's session, like we have seen a lot of new technologies, right? So my question is like, how do we seamlessly upgrade the new technology and implement? So do you have any best practice and where we need to focus more? And for example, like Spring Security, right? He talked about new features, Spring Security 6 and GraphQL over REST API. So already I have implemented a few set of technology and running into production, right? So again, one new technology come up and I see a lot of new features. Like I attempt to implement and upgrade those new feature into my current one. So is there any best practice? Like, do we have like, so how do we seamlessly upgrade and implement those new features?
So as you said, right, with a lot of new versions coming in, a lot of technologies coming in. Currently, we are also in the middle of one particular migration from upgrading from Spring Boot 2.7 to Spring Boot 3, right? So one of the major shifts that we are looking at is basically upgrading a lot of runtime environments, right? So, I mean, most of the enterprise systems that you would have worked on mostly are still using Java 8, right? Oracle Java 8 because of the already purchased licenses and all those things, right? The first thing that came into the entire point was how do we get Java 17 now? Base version changed, right? Till 2.7, that wasn't a particular issue, right? Java 8, good. Okay, let's run it. Now the baseline changed. How we get that? And you also know the skepticism that comes with upgrading to an entirely new runtime, licensing, if there are in licensing, all these things, right? So yeah, there are a few things which are mostly on the infrastructure side in terms of upgradation. But yeah, in terms of you talking about moving from REST to GraphQL, and that is also one migration that we did. Right? It actually on the API side, yes, it is a end consumer upgradation that needs to be done, right? Because now your REST APIs are now deprecated, available but deprecated, right? So now you will have a new set of controllers that you've written where you have exported your GraphQL endpoints, right? But transition over to here is pretty much simple. Like none of your Spring policies are being changed, right? You still have your controller, you still have your service implementations. It's just that now you have a new controller implementation, right? Or even for that case scenario, lot of times what you can already do, right? Let's say you already have a set of REST controllers defined, right? Even at on the deprecation side, you just add a new set of annotations, right? Query mappings and mutation mappings, right? Right over your get mapping, post mapping, whatever you're using, right? Even that should technically work well. It's until unless you're not going ahead and changing your entire uh, project structure entirely. I mean, that is something that probably at least we would avoid, right? We don't want to introduce new bugs onto a stable system, right? So that is something that we usually keep track of. Right? Mostly, if we want to add a new functionality, we still keep the uh, older things. We create a new extension of the same thing, right? We try to follow the solid principles. That basically gives a base framework so that you have one kind of a best practice to follow on, right? So that solid principle already gives you this kind of extension probabilities, right? You go ahead and create a decorator pattern that you already have an interface that is already defined for you. Now you want to upgrade something and your service implementation changes for that upgradation. You still use the same interface, but now you have a new implementation, right? On runtime with dependency inversion that Spring Boot provides, you can now inject your new implementation while keeping your old implementation untouched. Right? If something goes bad entirely, then you always have a backup to switch over. So that is something that we usually do. Right?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I would like to add another point. So if you have migrated to like Spring Boot 3 from Spring Boot 2, you must have seen like they have changed the package names as well. Okay, like earlier it was Java X dot something if you are using JPA, and now it's Jakarta. Okay, so if you want to migrate to Spring Boot 3, you cannot directly go and change the form. Okay, you cannot just mention like Spring Boot 3 I want to use. So you have to change your entire code. Okay. So as you asked, like what is the like approach we should follow? Okay, so we can like divide the components, like we can arrange like structurize the components whenever we are developing. Okay, so that whenever we are migrating to something new, it will be easy for us. Okay, so if you will see this same scenario, like changing the package names, nowadays like a lot of AI tools plugins are there, right? So you can directly integrate some AI plugin in IntelliJ, and you can just run one command like all change all the package declaration to Jakarta, right? So that makes sense. And another like instance is like if you remember earlier in security configuration, we used to use web security configure adapter, right? But they suddenly removed it, and like they made it deprecated, and now they have introduced like earlier only they have introduced security filter chain. So in that point of time also, like if we are like structurizing our components well, then it will be easy to migrate. So yeah, that.
Thank you.
Any other questions we have? Okay. Okay. There is one question. So from chat, like the question goes like, how do you create your own annotation in Spring Boot? Anyone?
To create custom annotation, as far as my knowledge goes, it's we use the at interface annotation, and using that you can define that this is a custom annotation that you're trying to create, and inside the block you can further have variable statements or other instantiations that you want, and define what that annotation is supposed to do or supposed to work as. So at interface followed by the name of the annotation.
So yeah, I guess we have one more question from same guy. Are you using GraalVM in production? Yes, we are using GraalVM in production, but we are using the most bare minimum things that we're doing, right? Like as he suggested, going into the instruction specification of GraalVM is something that we are still migrating on. But yeah, in the initial base transition of GraalVM is currently started, right? And also, when you say mutation, is it like a interface in Java? Uh, Not exactly, right? So it is more of a convention that we use in GraphQL, right? So this is more of like you're using your REST convention, right? Now you have your get, post, put, delete, right? So which each and every particular keyword says something about it, right? Like now HTTP get means that you're getting some data from the server, right? Post is basically you're creating some data object. Put is you're updating something, and delete again you're deleting something. So mutation is a convention over there, right? So mutation just say that if you're modifying any data, that can be creation, it can be deletion, or it can be updation, right? Any mutable operation that you're doing onto any data layer, so that is when we use a mutation, right? And whenever we want to basically go ahead and just get some data, that is when we use query. It is very similar to your SQL system, right? Like you do select when you want to get some data, you do insert and update commands when you want to mutate some data, right? So this is very similar to that itself, right? So probably, hopefully, that answered your question. So, yeah, I guess that's it from the online side as well.
Yeah, hello.
Oh,
Yeah, so my question is regarding value objects. So when do we in general like take a decision on taking like choosing value object or using value object? Like does it depend on the validations or how many validation can a value object can have?
Yes. So primarily, yes, validations, or even if you are trying to have a lot of, so let's say some we are trying like phone number, for example, or any such situation where you're having you're supposed to do encapsulation of multiple classes. So that is when you'll primarily go for value objects, and you don't really want to have the reference of the object every time. You don't want to create the object every time. So that's when you go for value object.
Okay, so in case maybe a phone number like can have multiple validation, maybe 10
You'll
digit.
have multiple objects, you'll have multiple instantiations, but then
Okay.
I will not have to do a check every time. I don't have to. It is also fail safe design pattern, so you don't really whatever modifications you're supposed to do, you'll do it in the same class. If you're having any exceptions, it will happen during instantiation. So that's why value objects.
Okay.
Any other questions? We have time to take up at least one or two questions more, right? Okay, cool. And if there are no questions, probably then we'll wind up the discussion, right? So thank you all for coming in, right? So there are a bit of refreshments available over here, so we can basically break out and be done for the day, right? Thank you all guys for coming out.